Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins. Today, it's a delight to be joined by Tim Farmer. Tim is the founder of iSquared. We're going to learn all about that in a moment. He's a seasoned business leader. He's got a very distinguished track record in media, market analysis, consumer insights. He previously led an organization called W5 that you may have heard of. It's an award-winning customer experience agency. It's based in Ireland, but it serves global brands. And he's also held senior roles at companies such as Nielsen, which I'm sure we've all heard of. Nielsen it's one of the world's leading authorities in media and consumer measurement. So today at iSquared, Tim, he leads what can be described as a coalition of AI, data, and analytics experts. And he helps organizations simplify and unlock the power of their data, which is very important in today's business landscape. And it helps organizations and individuals and executives make smarter, more impactful decisions. So, Tim, you're very welcome to VistaTalks today.
Brilliant. And thanks ever so much, Simon. I'm really pleased to be here and to be talking with you.
It's our pleasure. And let's dive straight into it because there's a lot I want to cover on these important topics, because these are topics that are impacting organizations of all shapes and sizes, but even big, massive global corporations are struggling with some of this challenge and opportunity around the world. So I'm going to dive straight in. I'm going to talk about ethics and AI because it's a hot topic. So when we think about ethical AI and we think about data governance, they're sort of front and center. They're on the boardroom agenda right now. How do businesses, or how should businesses be thinking about this, maybe from a responsibility, a transparency perspective, and how can they scale and use that data, that analytics and that automation? Tell us a bit about that and your position on that, Tim.
Absolutely. And do you know what I might do? I'll come back to that, but I just want to pick up on something you said earlier there as well, which is organizations of different scales and different sizes are struggling with this challenge, because that's exactly what we see. The reality is, whether you're an SME who's in a startup or a scaling position, you might have one set of challenges. But if you're a big, large enterprise, you still have challenges, but the nature of what you're dealing with changes. But fundamentally, all of that comes back to, for me, it's an issue in terms of trust, and that's trust in terms of the quality and the veracity of the data that you're using and the insights that you are deriving and the decisions that you're making on the back of that. And I think that, to bring it back to your question then about responsibility and transparency in terms of ethical AI and data governance, trust is a massively important factor there. And I talk about trust really in terms of two aspects. And I'll start with the outward perspective in that respect. So how are my data being used? Or can I trust this information? Can I trust these insights? And I think one of the first things you need to do is to understand, when you're using whatever you're doing, and to be honest, I'm going to start using data, AI, analytics as all the one thing, because they're all related. It's a continuum really in terms of how they exist. But fundamentally, how are they being used? How is someone using my data as a consumer? But equally, if I'm on the receiving end of that and I have some data, some analysis, something that I'm using to guide my decision making, how do I trust what's gone into that? And when I talk about that, there's several different layers. One, the transparency piece is really important. So, like, the sources that are used for me to actually draw this conclusion, can I trust those? Are those reliable sources? Do they come from trustworthy organizations? And that's really important. But even beyond that, when you look at, and this isn't an issue that exists within all organizations, is their own data. How can I trust our own data that exists in the organization? And what I'm saying there is not necessarily that there's anything malicious going on. It's not that at all. It's about the data quality. So can I trust how accurate is the data that is being used to drive decision-making within the organization? So I think really that point about ethical AI and data governance is fundamental, but I always bring it back to trust. And it's just a question of whether you are talking about the trusting of the data sources, the trusting of are they real, or is this misinformation? But even if it's your own data, do I still trust it? Is it accurate? Is it complete? More often than not, the challenges that exist in data strategy or analytics might not be the exciting answer here, but more often than not, the most important thing you need to do is to get the basics right and the fundamentals right in terms of the quality of the data, the veracity of the data. It's a cliche, but the old garbage in, garbage out is absolutely key in this respect. Data is brilliant, and analytics and AI are brilliant in terms as a tool to aid decision making. But if you've got bad data, whether that's data you can't trust or quality or whatever, you can still make good decisions, but that might be by happenstance that you made the right
It
decisions.
makes a lot of sense, Tim. And on the tip of my tongue was garbage in, garbage out, something we all learnt many moons ago.
Hmm.
But it's more relevant today than it's ever been, I suppose. But what I find interesting about the way you've answered that is it's trust, but from both sides of the equation. It's
Yeah,
trust as somebody may be sharing data with an organization, that
yeah,
it's going to be handled ethically, that you're going to respect it, it's going to be private, it's going to be used in the right manner, and that level of trust is built there. But
yeah.
there's also the trust from the other side within the organization that says, well, do I trust this data? Are we using it effectively? Is it helping us make those impactful decisions? And that trust is coming at it from various shapes and sizes. And I wanted to ask you about the data itself, because you have certainly worked in many multicultural environments, many different languages, many diverse industries. But you must have seen some common pitfalls, maybe, or some patterns along your travels where organizations are trying to make better decisions. They're trying to use data to make those data informed decisions, but they're hitting snags or they're hitting pitfalls. Are you seeing any patterns globally with the organizations that you're working with?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's probably two different ways of answering that question. One is sort of, are there issues in terms of global decision making? The others, are there patterns that I'm seeing across the board? So I might answer both of those in fairness. I think one of the patterns in terms of global decision making, actually, I'll take a step back. One of the challenges that impacts all decision making, and this goes back to, as I said earlier, small organizations, big organizations, is data silos, data not talking to each other. Very often the data exists and the information exists within an organization to be able to deliver the insight, to take action, to make the right decision. The challenge is about how you bring it together, whether there are necessary guardrails in place that keep things separate, particularly in the finance or healthcare world, or whether there are just challenges because there are silos that exist in an organization. Now, that's a common pitfall, but it's also, when you then take that to global decision making, different countries are silos in themselves more often than not in terms of the data and what exists. That's not the same for all organizations, of course, but the vast majority of organizations, you can't just assume that something worked in one country and translate that to another country, and that's partly the data, but it's also cultural. Data I spent a lot of my career in the sort of market research and insights sector. And if you even just think about simple things, I'll give you really one simple example. If I'm going to ask you how much you agree or disagree with something on a scale of 1 to 5, the way that somebody answers that in one country compared to another is very different, because different cultures will respond to data differently. And that's the reason why I wanted to take that into it, from a global decision making. You have to understand culturally what the differences are, and ultimately that's coming down to understanding the data as well as the culture.
Yeah, I really like that. And it's so true, whether it's language or culture or community, there are subtle differences and nuances. And what you're saying there, Tim, is the way people answer even that simple type question
Yeah,
can be very different depending on their background, their upbringing, their
yeah,
understanding, their culture, what part of the world they're in, etc.
absolutely.
And
And
that's really important, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. And there's another point just to add to that as well. So, and I know I'm being a little bit scattergun in my answer here, but there's another point here, which is we talk about this concept of data maturity, which is really important within being able to draw insight and make decisions, etc. Now, if I just give you a quick definition, for me, data maturity is the level at which an organization is able to effectively manage and use its data to be able to support the business, to support decision making. Even within a domestic organization, you will find that data maturity is not homogenous. There are some teams that are really strong. There are others who aren't. That's partly maybe teams, but it also might be the tools, the capabilities, the quality of the data, all of these different components. When you then take that at a global level, you will find big differences between what's possible in one country to what's possible in another country. And again, it goes back to that assumption that do not assume that just because something works in one country, you can lift and shift and do the same thing in another country.
No, I couldn't agree more. It makes perfect sense. And let me go into a little bit of the nitty-gritty if I can next, Tim, because we're talking about a lot of different concepts here and the importance of the data and the accuracy and the ethics of it, etc., and the multicultural environments. But when it comes to what you're doing at iSquared, you're focusing very much on simplifying the complex, right?
Yeah.
And you're trying to help organizations to ultimately make better decisions.
Yeah.
Now, what does that actually look like, though, from a day-to-day perspective? How are you actually helping these companies, these global organizations, these small, medium-sized companies? How are they actually trying to navigate this, what to some is an overwhelming world of data and AI? So what does it look like practically day to day for you and the iSquared team?
Absolutely. And I'll pick up on that word overwhelming, because I think that's sort of like, you can feel it. There's a tightness in your chest when you think about that in terms of, and when I speak to organizations, and I have spoken with some where I've talked to them about this area in terms of how we can help and improve them. And I've had the answer, well, look, we've looked at this before, but it's so big, it's really difficult to know where to start. And that that's where you feel the tension. You really do. So that's why I think the word overwhelming is spot on there. But for me, then it comes back to, well, the first and foremost, and it's again a cliche, but you don't try and boil the ocean. Try and find bite-sized solutions in terms of what you need to do for a start. But let me again take it back a step. What I tend to do when we're working with organizations is we have an understanding that the most important thing is that what you're doing is purpose-led. So the first thing, if you're trying to become, whether it's data-driven, to be adopting AI, to be adopting clever analytic solutions, the purpose is not to adopt AI. Even though there are people out there that are saying, right, we've got to be doing something with AI. That's not the purpose. The purpose is, what are you trying to achieve from a business and organizational point of view? Are you trying to have a faster go-to-market for new products? Or what is your end? What is your ultimate objective? And you've got to start there with that purpose. And what we tend to do, frankly, is we go through, I call it uncover, create, build. It's a 3-phase process. And the first thing that you're doing within that is actually understanding the business need. So talk to people across the organization, understand what the business challenges are. And we're not getting into the data initially. We're understanding what is it you're trying to do? Well, I'm trying to get products to market quicker. Right, okay. How are you doing that at the moment? What are the challenges that you have around that? So you're understanding things at a much more strategic level in terms of the challenges that people are facing. Within that, what are you doing? How are you using data? How does data impact your decision making? Does it at all? So that's a really helpful, if you like, mapping of the current situation. What I also do, it's very simple, is measure everybody's data maturity. So find out where you are. And at this point, we are not dreaming about solutions. We're trying to understand what the objective is that we're trying to achieve. We also want to understand, okay, so if we can get a product to you faster to market, what advantage does that give you? What's the value that you get from that? Again, I'm not interested in big econometric models. A back of an envelope calculation that gives something that helps you understand the magnitude of the benefit. Once you've done that, you've understood the needs across the organization, you've got some level of understanding of business impact, and you understand where the organization is now, you can then working with teams, you can then understand, right, okay, well, how does that fit with business strategy? Now let's pull together a roadmap in terms of what we want to do and what's the path that we want to follow. And once you've done that, you then are able to identify and understand, right, well, these are the 3 priorities I've got to do. So often we go into this process with someone and they say, well, like, they have a clear understanding, they believe, of what the priorities are, what will drive advantage. But actually, when you go through that organization-wide discovery process, you actually understand what really drives value and what's going to make a difference. And again, it goes back to, if I think about silos, there are data silos, but most organizations have organizational silos anyway. So if I ask somebody in marketing what's important, what's going to make a difference to the business, it's often going to be a marketing initiative that's going to make a difference to the business. If I ask a production team, it might be something that's more production related. So that process in itself surfaces what's important. And then throughout that, it's about, right, what we're going to do is build a pragmatic, achievable roadmap. I'm personally not somebody that, and I'm deliberately, when we talk about this, we're technology agnostic and solution agnostic, because again, it's starting with what's the purpose and what you're trying to achieve. Then what we do is we go through this creation phase where we bring in myself and also others from our coalition of experts, which you mentioned earlier, who are real leaders in the space, whether it's AI, whether it's analytics, predictive analytics, or other areas. And we say, right, now we're going to ideate and we're going to look at the art of the possible, look at what others have done in other sectors, and look at really creative solutions. And you get everybody's juices moving. Then you can start thinking about these amazing paths in terms of how you can make a difference. But what you always have to do is start pragmatically, and you might identify a really clever thing that you can do, but the AI version of that, the really intelligent version of that, is 5 steps along the route. Maybe the first step is a better dashboarding solution. So let's start simple. Let's do something that's achievable and let's start delivering value. That then builds momentum in terms of being able to tackle the larger problem. But in my view, what often happens is that's not the approach. The approach is trying to solve everything and trying to come up with a big overarching plan, rather than something that is, let's move, let's get momentum, let's get return, let's move, let's get momentum, let's get more return.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense. I was actually going to ask you about, when you're working with these global businesses and you're helping them translate that data into a strategy, why is it such a challenge and where they're going wrong? But you've kind of explained that there, they're not coming at it from the right perspective. And on that point, Tim, if a company or some executive listening to this episode, if they're looking to really get a good data strategy, are there some essential elements they should look at? What are the common blind spots that organizations often miss when they think about actually becoming more data driven?
Absolutely. So look, I mean, we've got a very simple framework in terms of how we look at this, and there are, if you like, 3 layers of the pyramid. At the bottom, you've got the foundations. Every pyramid, I guess, has the foundations at the bottom, but you have the foundations, the capabilities, and the leadership alignment are the 3 tiers of the pyramid. And within that bottom tier, you've got things like the quality of the data, the accessibility of the data. So going back to those silos, and governance. So exactly where we started. That middle tier, which is about capabilities, is tools, it's people, it's techniques. Then at the top, it's about leadership alignment. So are you on message in terms of the purpose, the strategic goals of the business? Are you able to deliver ROI, even if it, as I said, if it's a back of envelope calculation? And often the challenge with ROI is people try and get too complicated. But when I look at it from when we're putting a data strategy together for somebody, those 3 tiers, so the foundations, the capabilities, and the leadership alignment, are critical. You have to look after all of them. And the blind spot is that you start at the top and don't think about the bottom, or you start at the bottom and don't think about the top. And the risks there, if you start at the top and don't think about the bottom, you might be using some of the most amazing tools and technology, but ultimately it's built on dodgy foundations. It's built on data that's not good. It's built on data that's not correct, or it's inadequate. And the challenge there, you go back to exactly where we started, is trust. So if you start thinking, right, we're going to really attack this, we've got some amazing things we're going to do, and the first things that you do are built on shoddy foundations, who's going to trust you to do the next thing and the second thing, and really how are you going to get value out of the data? The other side is if you focus too much on the foundations and not enough on the leadership alignment and the goals of the business, you're going to be building tools that just leave, so what? That's right, great, really clever. You've done some intellectual exercise there, but so what? Where's the value?
Yeah. Is it actually driving the needle? Is it making a difference? Yeah, get it. That makes perfect sense. And thanks for sharing some of those essential elements, those three tiers, critical if people want to get this right. I'm going to
Absolutely.
throw a bit of a curveball, Tim, if I can, because what about the statement that sometimes having more data, what about the statement that sometimes having more data doesn't always lead to better decisions?
Yeah.
And I'm coming at it from a perspective as how do business leaders and executives and management, how do they filter some of that signal from the noise, if I can use that term? How do
Mm.
you actually build the confidence in the insights that you're acting on?
Yeah, and look, that's a really good question. I mean, it's the age-old challenge of you can't see the wood for the trees. There's so much data. And to be frank, that's not really a curveball. It's a really common situation that there's so much I don't know what to do and I don't know where to start. And it become again go back to that overwhelming. I feel the chest tightening up again already. But no, it's a very common situation. But I think that's where I come back to. I mean, simplifying complexity for me is not just a slogan. It's a way of doing things. And what I mean by that is this is not about finding really easy, like basic ways to do things, but it's about trying to find um, dealing with a complex challenge, but doing so in a solution that is not over engineered. Explaining and communicating what you've done, however complex what you've done, explaining that in the simplest way that's effective, that talks to the language of the business. So if I go back to your question there, the challenge for me there is with too much data, you could get far too carried away in terms of over engineering things. So again, go back to what it is you want to achieve. Look at where you are now. Don't think about step five. Think about the first solution. Think about the phase one, a phased implementation. What's the first thing I'm going to do that's going to deliver me value? And don't overcomplicate. So do that, deliver value, then you can move on. Now, the challenge may still exist, which is, well, I don't really know. There's so much here. I still don't know where to start. Yes, I want to do something simple, but which simple thing should I do first? And to be honest, that's where I turn around and say that's where like one of the most important assets within any data strategy or anything that you're trying to do in this area is down to the people and the expertise. And that's where either using the experts that you have in the organization or bringing in others who've got experience, I think, to be frank, can then help you see the wood through the trees. I'm a big believer, though, in you have to be able to teach someone how to fish. It's not just about, look, you can always just have a vendor relationship where someone's doing that for you all the time. Bring someone on the journey. And that's also where I go back to the strategy, is help put the strategy in place so the business can actually do it for themselves longer term.
Yeah, and I really like what you're saying there, Tim, about not over engineering things, because sometimes it is back to that overwhelming that you mentioned.
Mm.
And there's so much you could do, and then you actually don't do anything. So getting this is what we're going to do first. We're going to almost prove that model, do that right, get the
Mm.
outcome that we want, and then we'll move on to maybe a phase two or whatever you
Yeah.
end up calling it. I think that makes complete sense. And I also love what you finished off by talking about there is about uh, bringing humans back into the conversation, because we're in a data technology AI discussion here. But you're also talking, I suppose, about some of the highly specialized team you have at iSquared, because,
Mhm.
back to that coalition of people that you have, whether they're experts in AI or data or analytics. Now, you must have to look for certain qualities when you're putting that group of people together to work on these big projects. How are you maintaining alignment across, that complex team, that high performing team, and again, across many different languages and countries? How does that work from iSquared's perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that the point is absolutely key, that it's human beings at the middle of this, in terms of what you're doing. It's also human beings when you have the best data in the world that gives you the best suggestions, but it's human beings that need to be the ones who bring their experience to bear. So in terms of the team, I mean, there's a few things really in terms of what we're looking for and the partners we work with in particular as well. And some of the common alignments are, I'm going to go back to this simplifying complexity thing, is a belief in that. Now, I'm not looking for everybody to have that as a slogan underneath the logo like I do, but what I am looking for is that people that believe in that pragmatic approach that is based on a necessary understanding and expertise, but that understands that we need to be able to convey, to do what we're doing in a simple, pragmatic way, but to convey what we're doing simply. So the expertise is a given. You need that. But that buying into being able to deliver and to do something in as simple a business focused way as possible in terms of what you're actually delivering to the organization, talking the same language, those are really important points for me, and always have been. And I think that's, I mean, beyond that, the other thing that I'll also say, and I think this is also really important, even though we're talking about data analytics, AI, human relationships are absolutely key to everything. And the best partnerships work because you've got really strong human relationships. It doesn't have to be a particular type of relationship, but that it's strong. You understand each other, you understand what you bring and what you do when you collaborate together. And that for me is a really important point. And that's a fundamentally human characteristic, is the importance of collaboration. If there's one other thing I'll mention, actually, it's intellectual curiosity, and a desire to learn, expand the mind, to share expertise in that respect as well.
Yeah, and again, I think what you're saying is spot on, because it's human plus is the
Yeah,
equation, right? It's human plus technology. It's not just technology. And I also like what you said about it's the human at the center. We'd often talk in our side of the world about humans in the core, human at the core,
yeah,
not in the loop, not just part of it, but actually at the core of what's going on here. And I think you're echoing some of that same sort of thoughtfulness here in terms of the way that you organize things. And I suppose when I think about data as well, Tim, I'm not just thinking about the data that a company holds and its own data,
yeah,
whether that's the finance dashboards or whatever, but all their customer records. And then you think about these big, large brands where they have so much user generated content, or maybe they're trying to communicate and they've got service brochures and, social media content and articles and blogs and video and all that stuff. It's all data at the end of the day. It all comes down to ones and
yes,
zeros that has to be managed, that has to be looked at properly, and ultimately simplified from it being complex to something that you can actually use, whether that's turning it into different language pieces, whether it's making it more appropriate for the different countries and regions that we were talking
yeah,
about earlier. So it's a really insightful way of looking at data. So thanks for sharing that. And before I run out of time, I want to squeeze in one more question, Tim, if I can. For people that are listening to this discussion today, or for anybody, leaders who are looking to maybe tune in a bit more to their data strategy, because whether it's data regulations, we've seen a lot of that changing
yeah,
recently and
definitely.
probably more to come. We're seeing AI upending the way we think about data and making things very different. But people who want to evolve their data maturity, their data strategy, if you were, having to give a quick one step guide, here's something you should start with. Take this step today to build a smarter, more insights led organization. What would you say? What could you leave us with as something to think about, Tim?
Absolutely. I'm going to give you 3 steps, but I'll be quick.
Sure.
Um, Start with purpose. understand what you're trying to do, understand what's the goal that you're trying to achieve to support the business, understand where you are. So what are you doing now? How are you doing things? And then find a quick win, find a pragmatic quick win. Then you can go beyond and you can expand and generate momentum beyond that.
I couldn't agree more. And that's a really nice thing to end on. So first of all, I want to thank everybody who's been watching or listening to this episode with Tim Farmer at iSquared. I want to ask our audience around the world to make sure they tune in again, of course, to watch and or listen to the next VistaTalks show, where once again, we'll be catching up with some more interesting topics with interesting people, just like Tim from all around the world. But Tim, thanks so much for being on VistaTalks. It's been great to get your insights and your, explore a little bit about the world of data from iSquared's perspective. So thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much. Really appreciated it.